The White Sox have fired manager Pedro Grifol. Let's discuss the organization finally putting him out of his misery and finally admitting this losing is not acceptable on a bonus episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of Southside Showdown. Part of the Fansided Network, you can check out my written content at SouthsideShowdown.com. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, after weeks of speculation that manager Pedro Grifol would be fired, GM Chris Getz must have gotten the blessing of ownership because he finally pulled the trigger and canned Pedro Grifol. Grifol is out as the manager, the team just announced this morning. And while it would have been nice to see Pedro Grifol wear a potentially historic losing record over his neck, he had to go. Losing nearly 89 games before even reaching 30 wins just cannot be accepted. The sad thing is the franchise waited until now, not after the 3-22 start to the season. Not after the first franchise record-setting losing streak that happened a few months back in late May, early June. Instead, it happens in early August after the Sox lost 22 of their past 23 games. That included a nationally embarrassing 21-game losing streak that was 3 more defeats shy of setting a new MLB record for consecutive losing in the modern era. But at least owner Jerry Reinsdorf finally let the final remnants of the last leadership regime let go. Now you and I can finally see if Chris Getz can finally make up for his lackluster performance at the trade deadline by nailing this next hire. Here's what the team had to say. Quote, as we all recognize our team's performances this season has been disappointing on many levels, end quote, said Chris Getz, White Sox senior vice president / general manager. Quote, despite the on-field struggles and the lack of success, we appreciate the effort and professionalism Pedro and the staff brought to the ballpark every day. These 2 seasons have been very challenging. Unfortunately, the results were not there, and a change is necessary as we look to our future and the development of a new energy around the team, end quote. The statement goes on to read, Grifol, who was hired on November 3rd of 2022, led the White Sox to an 89-190 record over 1+ seasons at the helm, including a 28-89 record in 2024. The White Sox will begin a search for a new manager immediately, with a replacement expected to be announced after the conclusion of the 2024 season. All right, first, let's just remember, Grifol should have never been hired in the first place. And that's why getting rid of him is also a good thing. You finally clear house of the last failed leadership regime, that dysfunctional leadership regime of Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn. You know, that's one of the reasons why the competitive window closed so abruptly. Those two just could never get on the same page. Towards the end, they could not acquire the talent needed to put the team over the top. The owner put, self-imposed spending restrictions to allow them to do that. General manager Rick Hahn decided, well, I'll just invest those limited resources in the bullpen instead of second base and right field. And then he got duped in an interview from basically what I've been told. Pedro basically out-interviewed former manager Ozzie Guillen. And I loved how former manager Ozzie Guillen was questioning, basically how good of a manager was he? A guy who won a World Series and another AL Central title with the White Sox. How bad was he that they hired Pedro Grifol, who was just an absolute train wreck? I mean, he was in over his head from day one as he allowed the clubhouse to become even more toxic. And the Sox have known nothing but bad since he was hired. This was a man who on the day he was hired said the style of baseball that they were going to play was to be, I'll just say appropriately G-rated, to kick the opponent's rear end every night. Well, it turns out it was the Sox who got their butts kicked in every night. And this year's team was supposed to play, and he actually created a very lame acronym out of the word FAST. According to Pedro, they were supposed to play fearless, aggressive, selfless, and technically sound. Well, the Sox have the worst defense and offense. They're very aggressive at blowing leads. And Pedro was aggressive at sounding like an idiot whenever he spoke to the media. I mean, this guy actually thought he was a good manager. And I get you got to be confident. But he kept saying, I'm good at this job, despite his record saying, no, you're not. And he said this as recently as late July. Quote, "Of course I want to be here. This is what I've dreamed of all my life. This is what I have a passion for. This is what I think I'm good at. Whether the record displays it or not, I think we're in a better spot than what people think we are, even if it's hard to see," end quote. Again, when you got a manager who just doesn't, that's a guy who doesn't have a grasp on reality, or at least doesn't understand the gravity of the situation he's in. And that's why he's out of a job, in my opinion. And thankfully, this is all over. Now, there were reports that players were growing tired of him, especially after he almost sucked the energy out of a well-rested team at the All-Star break. There's a report, the team was more energized, was ready to go, and then he makes batting practice mandatory and gave a speech that some players thought he was putting the blame on them if the team finishes worse than the 62 Mets. And also, something that needed to be done if Getz and Jerry Reinsdorf want to avoid the terrible distinction of finishing worse than the 62 Mets is maybe you might want to just get a new voice, especially when you've lost 22 of 23 games. Because what I really do like about this, at least right now, despite the timing, is this is all circles back to finally someone is held accountable beyond just DFAing a bad a bad veteran. One of the many reasons that this franchise has decayed is the lack of accountability. And finally, someone in leadership got held accountable for this season. And now this is a signal that while late, losing this embarrassingly is not acceptable. Hopefully the Sox can get a manager that is qualified and the game is not passed them by, because the game passed by Tony La Russa after he was hired, famously because the owner wanted to make up for his regret of firing him back in the late 80s. So he was hired after, Ricky Renteria was deservedly let go, but the game had passed him by. And Pedro was not cut out to even be a roving minor league instructor. His bullpen decisions were terrible. Lineups were bad. Allowing the clubhouse to grow toxic last year is a disgrace. If you want to know just how bad it is, Jim Margulis of SoxMachine.com, he sums it up pretty good. This is what he writes. Like most criticisms of Grifol, the simplest thing is to fall back to the numbers. A former hitting coach with the Royals, Grifol entered the position preaching fundamental play and sound swing decisions, and has overseen arguably the worst defense in the league in each of the past 2 seasons. And the 2024 team scored the fewest runs per game of any MLB team over the last 40 years. Even the most recent storyline questioning how much blame Grifol directed towards his players in a post-All-Star break team meeting where he preached a mission of avoiding the all-time record for losses is best underscored by the fact that the White Sox lost the first 17 games of the second half. Ironically, last season, veterans criticized Grifol's management for being too lenient and permissive after being dealt away at the trade deadline. But this year, Grifol's greatest faux pas, which even he seemed regretful of recently, is viewed to be publicly bashing the team's effort during a late May no-hit bid by the Orioles starter Kyle Bradish. The thought line is that with either approach, the Sox lost under Grifol. They lost to a surprising degree, even to those across the industry who did not believe he's ever been handed a strong roster in this organization. Grifol probably expounds analytical concepts and language more than any White Sox manager in history. The most common way it was experienced was him citing sample size of why he stuck by struggling veterans such as Tim Anderson and Andrew Benintendi for months through underperformance, prodded along by nagging injury. That was a great summary of the Pedro Grifol era. First of all, when I go back to why he shouldn't even be hired, the Royals had a manager opening in going into the 2023 season, and they passed over Grifol. They didn't want him. The Sox, for some reason, with their obsession of this Royals organization, at least the bad parts of them, jumped at the chance to hire him. That just shows you again how flawed the thinking was to hire him. His own team did not want to give him a promotion. And yet the Sox did. And again, that's another reason why the Royals are in wild card contention right now. They have learned from their mistakes. And if the Sox want to copy the Royals, fine. Go find a Bobby Witt Jr. and spend your free agent money, your limited free agent money wisely. Where, the Royals spent it on starting pitching. The Sox should spend it on basically an entire lineup. Because it just got bad. Nobody got better under Pedro Grifol. And some of that's on the coaching. And to be fair, yes, Pedro was handed some terrible rosters, especially this year. He's not the one going out batting. He's not the one throwing. But he is the one that made the decision to have Frazier Ellard make his big league debut in a high-leverage situation when you're trying to snap a losing skid. He is the one that continues to trot out Gavin. He was the one that continued to trot out Gavin Sheets, who's struggling mightily and has proven that he's nothing more than a fourth outfielder. He's the one that continues to play these bad veterans instead of maybe, I don't know, helping Chris Getz, get an evaluation of these guys. I mean, he buried Oscar Colas. Dominic Fletcher got 3 weeks to see if he could be the starting right fielder. And then Pedro could not wait to keep shoving veterans down our throat. And again, giving Andrew Benintendi at-bats after at-bats after at-bats. Well, for those that wanted Grifol to wear the worst record in modern baseball history, don't worry. That worst record is still on the table for GM Chris Getz to wear. And let's discuss if you and I should be confident he can make the right hire next on Locked On White Sox. The White Sox record might be historically awful, but they still have the crosstown rival. The Chicago Cubs are coming to Guaranteed Rate Field, and the New York Yankees follow. The Crosstown Classic is always fun to see live, no matter what both teams' records are, because it's a celebration of Chicago. Plus, Aaron Judge and Juan Soto are two players you should see live in your lifetime. Use Game Time to get your tickets at the most affordable price. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car or MVP, the MVP and bring home some huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Paul Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB, on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the White Sox are off today, but start a 2-game series tomorrow with the crosstown rival, the Chicago Cubs. First pitch is at 7:10 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back to this bonus episode of Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, it is somewhat of a joyous day. I mean, you never want to see a guy lose his job, but Pedro Grifol was really bad at his job. He wasn't qualified to do it, and now he can go be a roving minor league instructor. He can finally fulfill his potential. And you could say that's harsh, but that's how bad of a manager he was. The guy lost over, he was, 101 games under 500? He might be historically the worst manager in Chicago White Sox history. He made Terry Bevington, a guy who once called for an arm in the bullpen where nobody was warming up. There wasn't even a pitcher in the bullpen. He made Terry Bevington look like a genius. He made Jerry Manuel, another guy who started off with some success, actually, but then turned out to be not a very good manager. He made Jerry Manuel look like a Hall of Fame manager. He had people wanting Tony La Russa back. I mean, the guy who helped torpedo this competitive window and the guy that Pedro was hired to replace and was supposed to be an upgrade and was supposed to be getting this team to play fundamentally better baseball. He had us wanting Tony back. That's how bad he was. And I'm not confident that Chris Getz is going to get the next hire right. First, I think he's going to get shot down by Skip Schumacher, his reported first choice. You know, the Miami Marlins manager who's expected to be a free agent after this year. He's trying to escape a dysfunctional small market mess in Miami. So what makes you think he will take this job on? Plus, he has a National League Manager of the Year award. So he's got some skins on the wall. And while, yes, this year's team isn't that great, a team might think, you know what? He could put us over the top. He took a not very talented Miami Marlins team that did have some luck on its hand, on its side, but he did take them to the playoffs. That's impressive. So a contender might say, you know what? Let's get rid of the guy we have. Or, somewhat like the Cubs, like an emerging team. Let's get rid of the guy we have. Let's pay for Skip. And Terry Francona, to me, he's the dream. You could say he's old, but the guy still wins. He's a Hall of Famer. The game has not passed him by. He has obviously taken this year off to address his health. And if he decides to return, would he want to even take part of the losing that's going to happen in the early part? I don't think so. My fear is it will be another manager with no big league experience, and the Sox will continue to deal with the same problems that they've had at manager ever since Ozzie Guillen left. And yeah, the Sox have had some success with first-time managers, Jeff Torborg, Gene Lamont, Jerry Manuel, and Ozzie, but they've also struck out badly recently with Robin Ventura and Pedro Grifol. AJ Pierzynski is a name that has been leaked out, and obviously he's a Sox legend. But how he described why Terry Francona would turn down the job sounds also like a man who would not want to take this job either, unless there's conditions. And that's the biggest thing that you got to understand. Maybe Getz can get the hire right, but if I'm, a guy coming in, especially a name, I want certain conditions. Like, think about this condition that he's walking into. He's going to be working with a yes man, unqualified GM, and an owner who still thinks baseball should be played like the 50s Brooklyn Dodgers and pay him at that rate. So if I'm a name manager, even if I'm inexperienced like AJ, he's a name still. Or Skip Schumacher, if I come in, I got to say, look, the analytics staff has to be expanded. Scouting too. The focus has to get back to acquiring elite talent like the club did back in the day, which I talked about on this morning's episode. Money has to be spent to cover areas the farm system cannot produce. Ethan Katz has got to go out the door. And I'll let Brian Bannister at least give influence. And heck, he can even make the hire since he doesn't want to coach. He just wants to be an advisor, but that's fine. And the hitting has to return to hitting home runs. You play in a home run friendly ballpark. Hit the ball over the fence. Now, I'd also like, and I talked with Jordan Lazowski about this a couple days ago, I would also like maybe a manager that can come in and be like, okay, yeah, let's launch it as much as we can, but once it gets to 0-2, 1-2, let's look for something that we can put into play, or let's keep fouling off pitches to at least make that pitcher, the pitcher work. Let's figure out however we can to get the count back in our favor, or let's just not get down 1-2, 0-2. That type of stuff. And Getz cannot just make a manager change and think, that's it. Let's do a business this way. They got to get back to acquiring elite talent, whether it's through draft or trades. It's most likely going to be through the draft. Also, whoever the manager is must tell Tony La Russa, who's speculated to probably have to give his blessing to stick to straight up just, be an advisor. If I have a question, it can't hurt to ask a Hall of Famer. Or, hey, we want you to look at this minor league player. It can't hurt to give his opinion on that. Or to determine, hey, who's the difference between this guy that we should draft late? But he can't be the shadow GM anymore. And that's what's speculated, that Tony is running things behind the scenes. This has to stop. Chris Getz has to actually take this opportunity to make up for his lackluster trade deadline, to prove he's actually up to the task, and more importantly, that he's in charge, not Jerry. Yeah, Jerry's the owner, but he should do what he's always said he's done. Just sit in the owner's box and let the people do their job. Although I still think Chris Getz is going to be just like the other issues that he's had with guys that he's hired. He's hired guys, and they just make bad decisions. But still, at its principle and in its process, Chris Getz has to prove he is in charge now. Not Jerry, not Tony. An interim will be named later. Once that is in, I'll try to throw out a short to discuss that. As again, I'm heading out of town for vacation. And while I'm out, I'll be running a Sox fan series while I'm out. I discussed it on earlier today's show. But that wraps up this bonus edition of Locked On White Sox. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just remember, I'm on vacation tomorrow. I'll start the fan series that I discussed on today's episode. Feel free to leave comments about Pedro's firing. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Again, have a great day. Enjoy the fan series starting tomorrow.